Meanwhile, not everything is going well in Putin's kingdom. There are very serious problems, this time truly without any rumors, facing Ramzan Kadyrov. A number of reputable media outlets, in particular the Ukrainian outlet Ukrinform, citing the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense, have reported that dictator Ramzan Kadyrov's kidneys have completely failed. Kadyrov is currently in his private hospital, which is situated in the city of Grozny. Members of his family clan have already arrived at the hospital, apparently gathering there to be present and possibly hear the dying man's last words. At the same time, there is now an active search underway for a new dictator of Chechnya. The main contenders for the position are Kadyrov's eldest son, Akhmat Kadyrov, the current head of the Chechen government, Magomed Daudov, as well as the commander of the Akhmat Abti Special Unit, Alaudinov. 20-year-old Akhmat is currently serving as the acting deputy prime minister of the Chechen government, and most likely he was supposed to eventually take over his father's position. Since the year 2004, Kadyrov has been diagnosed with a severe form of pancreatic necrosis, a condition which has a mortality rate of about 80%. This disease is considered extremely dangerous and life-threatening. This is extremely bad news for the Kremlin. But by the way, it's worth noting that Putin has also disappeared. He has hardly been seen since his New Year's address. That video where he supposedly went out for Christmas and lit candles with participants of the criminal war in Ukraine could actually be what's called an information canned good, meaning it was recorded who knows when, most likely even before New Year's. Otherwise, Putin is actually no longer being shown at all. Where has Putin gone? Where did he disappear to? The Kremlin also showed a video conversation, supposedly with a boy. In fact, they showed the boy whom Putin was calling, but Putin himself was not shown. You could only hear his voice on the phone. The only question is, was it really Putin? And again, when was this recorded? In this video, Putin asks the boy how he liked visiting the submarine. In short, Putin has disappeared as well. And the most important question, why did this happen against the backdrop of American attacks on Russian oil tankers? How could this be connected? And obviously there is a connection. The fall of the Maduro regime. Putin hasn't commented on this in any way, even though this was his key and main ally in Latin America. That's what we see. Zero reaction. And moreover, he hasn't appeared. And no one has actually seen Putin in public for the past 10 days. All the videos that have been repeated again are so-called information preserves, pre-recorded by the Kremlin press service and released at the right moment. There have been a large number of investigations about this. By the way, against this backdrop, there was trolling from the UK Defense Minister John Healey, who, when asked by a journalist which world leader he would kidnap, answered unequivocally, Putin. I would take Vladimir Putin into custody, and I would hold him fully accountable for the war crimes he has committed, including those that I personally witnessed in Bucha during one of my very first visits to Ukraine, and for the abduction and forced deportation of Ukrainian children. The question of whether kidnapping Vladimir Putin was a possibility came up this week, and let me put it this way, it is obviously an intentional provocation. They even asked former President Donald Trump whether he had ever considered the possibility of kidnapping Vladimir Putin. To this, Trump gave an evasive answer, saying, I don't think there will be a need for that. But at the same time, he didn't exactly rule it out either. In addition, today was another notable and successful day for the Ukrainian Defense Forces. 3 offshore drilling rigs belonging to Lukoil were hit in the Caspian Sea. All of this is very significant and important, again, both from the perspective of military transit operations from Iran, where Shaheds and other weapons are transported from the territory of this Islamic State. Today, the Filonovsky, Korchagin, and Greifer drilling rigs were hit, which, among other things, are used by the Russian army for its own purposes. The extent of the damage is currently being clarified. But I will repeat once again, this happened 1,000 kilometers away, and the Caspian Sea has ceased to be an internal sea of Russia and other states. In short, it's almost as if they've very clearly shown that they can firmly grab you by the testicles at the most unexpected and surprising moment, and from as far away as the enemy allows, as much as the enemy allows. OSINT analysts carefully analyzed the precise geolocation of the Oreshnik strike in the Lviv region, and after a detailed assessment determined that the strike was not carried out on Stry, which is the largest gas storage facility in all of Europe, but instead targeted the Sknyliv airfield as well as the Lviv aircraft plant. As a result of this attack, the runways of the airfield were damaged, among other things. The airfield building and the parked automobiles were also significantly damaged. This was reported by OSINT researchers who carefully conducted the geolocation of the strike. Well, basically everything is quite clear here. And finally, there is one more piece of news which is also very important in the context of Putin, who has disappeared, vanished without a trace, and it's still unclear exactly where this rat is currently hiding. On Russian TV, there is currently a complete and utter silence about the fact that the so-called special military operation has already lasted longer than the Great Patriotic War, as they call it. This is a Russian invention, of course. There was no such thing as the Great Patriotic War. There was World War II. But the Kremlin prefers to live by historical myths from the Soviet era. So there is a coordinated silence and ignoring of the topic. A number of Telegram channels are writing about this. Not a single Russian state-run federal television channel has officially reported that the so-called SMO has already lasted longer than the Great Patriotic War. In the news broadcasts on Channel 1, they primarily talked about targets and Russian strikes on infrastructure facilities in Ukraine. Rossiya 1 was showing supposed improvements in the positions of Russian occupiers at the front, the weather on the Baltic Sea, and bats, and the oldest carpet in the world. Well, that's a wonderful set of news stories. Nevertheless, the excess has already been recorded for 1,418 days. That's exactly how long the Russian military aggression has lasted. The so-called special military operation, which has long since ceased to be an SMO and has become a full-scale war. And the fact that it has now lasted as long as the so-called Great Patriotic War, of course, doesn't interest them, since this is a shameful topic, and once again, there's nothing to boast about. The results of the war are far from what the Kremlin and propagandists were counting on back in that now distant February of 2022. And very soon now, a sad and difficult date will arrive, the 4-year anniversary of the full-scale invasion. That will be in February, just a little over a month from now, and we will mark that date, mark this sad anniversary, and take a moment to reflect on everything that has happened since then. But it is a sad date not only for Ukrainians, but also for Russians and for the Kremlin, since they have still not achieved the goals they set. And at this rate, it seems they are heading toward their own defeat, just as Germany, which started World War II, eventually met its defeat, the country that started the war and ultimately lost it. And as we know, the Soviet Union, despite being part of the coalition of victors, ended the war with the worst outcome. The greatest loss in all of world history was suffered, and to this day the full extent remains unknown. It's clear that it wasn't the 20 million that Nikita Khrushchev spoke of. We're talking about numbers at least twice as high. The direct population losses of the then Soviet Union in that war, that's the result of Stalin's strategy: meat, 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 and more meat. In fact, nothing has changed. They fight in exactly the same way as they did, for example, 80 years ago.
By the way, speaking of Putin, Kadyrov disappeared, but Putin has vanished too. And this is really stirring up the internet right now. Well, first of all, there's this strange story with the congratulation with the color of the tie. There's a theory that it wasn't even a double or a triple or a udmurt, but that artificial intelligence wrote it and created this Putin avatar. And Putin is completely absent from the public sphere right now. You say Kadyrov is shown for a second and a half, 2 quick shots, 3 claps, and that's it. On Russian television, something completely bizarre aired. An absolutely mind-boggling story. A child in kindergarten seems to be talking to Putin via video call, but only Putin's voice is present on the call. They don't even show a live Putin. What is this about? Is it more plastic surgery, a bender, Russian, traditional, New Year's, or could there be something else behind this?
Well, a bender doesn't fit at all, because Putin doesn't drink. And because of that, by the way, he's not a very good person, because a good person can't not drink. That's another matter. There could be different...
Oh, in which particular soul, I must genuinely ask? I am truly, truly, deeply sorry.
Of course, this is connected to several things at once. That is, first of all, it's plastic surgery, without a doubt, because lately he has been looking rather bad. On one hand, his face has been heavily retouched. And on the other hand, he has a lot of accumulated problems, because after all, he's an old man. That's why he has problems with his teeth. He has kidney problems. He has prostate problems. He's got problems with just about everything. No, for a man over 70, even in developed countries, though in developed countries they do not hide it. There they simply put someone in a clinic and the person says, yes, for a while I will be out of commission, so to speak, because I have some medical issues. But Putin can't show that. He's supposed to be eternal. He doesn't even wear glasses, for example, even though his eyesight is really bad. They print things for him in large letters, all that sort of thing, and so on. And he wears contact lenses to look younger, because he thinks that if he puts on glasses, people will say, that's it, he's an old man, and so on. Although when he walks, it's already obvious to everyone that he's an old man. In other words, his walk has been that of an old man for a long time now. That is, it's already been
several years, like an old man on stilts. And we've discussed this with you more than once already. Yes. And how much more overgrown it was back then.
I think, by the way, that it's not out of the question. Even some kind of, I was going to say, plastic surgery. And instead of Putin, it'll be Patrushev who comes out. And so they'll swap places, and Patrushev, on the contrary, will come out in Putin's place. Because, as you see, Valery Dmitrievich Solovey told us that Patrushev made a deal with Trump, gave up Venezuela, and so on. Although all of this is absolute nonsense. Yes, complete nonsense. By the way, Patrushev has also been gone for a long time. The very last time he was seen, he was giving Putin some kind of minor medal, and after that, Patrushev disappeared completely from the public eye. He hasn't even shown up at events where he's supposed to be present, like as an advisor on shipbuilding when they were launching some boats, submarines, and so on. So, of course, they have medical problems. Putin definitely does, without a doubt. Plus, he's a Sybarite. He actually doesn't really like to work, prefers to just relax. He wound up all these loose ends. I mean, after all, he was quite actively working from October to December. We saw him almost every day at some meeting or another. One particular day, he conspicuously puts on a standard supermarket worker's smock and then proceeds to meet with the high-ranking military officials. Subsequently, he travels to a different location where he delivers several important speeches articulating various significant points or other relevant statements. And then he tells you, well, I have to be there. Maybe for once he went somewhere to ski, but he can't go to Courchevel anymore. So he went somewhere else. He can't even go to Sochi, he's afraid. So maybe he went to the Urals, somewhere like that.
Well, I guess we'll be seeing even less of him now because, let's be honest, phobias. He already had more than enough of them. But even more were added after the Venezuelan operation, which even the laziest person, unless they were the only one who didn't discuss it, but I want to discuss it. Did it add more fears for Putin? I think so, because Dima Medvedev, whom we've already mentioned, served as a vivid indicator. I can even quote for you what this perpetually drunk creature spewed out. Look, he said that after the events in Venezuela, he could imagine a similar scenario of a leader being seized in other countries, specifically Friedrich Merz. The abduction of that same neo-Nazi Merz could make for a great plot twist in this carnival-like series. At this point, there's little left that can surprise anyone. There's a certain degree of realism here, Berger and so on, and then he started throwing around threats mixed with insults. What do you think? Did the Kremlin even flinch at what happened in Caracas? Well, in particular, characters like Medvedev and Putin.
I don't think they flinched in the sense that they might be kidnapped. Trump isn't planning to kidnap Putin. Why would he need to kidnap him? He can always be summoned to Washington. He'll always be ready to go anywhere Trump tells him to, just like he rushed to Alaska when Trump told him to. And besides, after all, Medvedev didn't just randomly write that nuclear weapons are a deterrent. He immediately wrote that this is something you can only allow yourself to do with countries that don't have nuclear weapons. As for states that have nuclear weapons, they don't fall under this category. These are the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. They have the privilege of veto power at Security Council meetings, but also the privilege of not being abducted by competitors. Here I really think they have nothing to fear. They're different. It was a blow because, you see, Valery Dmitrievich Solovey claims there was an agreement, but in reality there was no agreement at all. That's exactly the problem for Putin and his entire regime. Trump simply took Venezuela from them without giving them anything in return. In other words, he just took that piece away from them. And there is no agreement at all, like you let me do as I please in Venezuela, and I let you do as you please in Ukraine. No way, not even close. On the contrary, that's exactly what it's about. So they're in shock that Trump, such a bad guy, just took a juicy piece from them, and Venezuela is a huge prize. It has the largest proven oil reserves in the world. That's 300 or 305 billion barrels. Potentially that can be extracted. Plus next to Guyana, where the United States is already making their presence felt as much as they can. So Plus, Venezuela is a large country in Latin America, and above all in South America. It's a very symbolic thing because they killed Cubans there, and the Cubans howled about it. So they held a mourning here. They said, you see, we've been trampled on and so on. In other words, basically, Trump told them bluntly that you could be next. Though it's not interesting with you because there's nothing to take from you. Cuba is an absolutely impoverished country, which has been decaying for many decades because it used to just leech everything from the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union disappeared, well, Russia, by the way, Putin's Russia gives them very little. And Cuba itself used to be a real tourist gem. In other words, it basically has nothing else except its tourism potential. But in order to become a tourist paradise, you need to completely redevelop the entire coastline. But with Trump, they could have come to an agreement. You know, it's like when someone suggested the idea that America could take Gaza and turn it into the pearl of the Mediterranean, and so on and so forth. Kumba could have made a deal with America in exactly that way. That is, she could have said, we take back everything we said. Enough of this communism. We're becoming an American appendage. But we want to live, so to speak, in comfort, because this would simply be a paradise for American tourists. They would build a huge number of hotels here. It's all very close to America. It's convenient. It's nice. It's warm. It's beautiful. So basically, if you were to redevelop all of Cuba, it would be a huge, highly desirable piece of real estate. Just imagine how much could be made. If we're talking about gas, that's just a few square kilometers in the dozens. But Cuba is still a big island. Just imagine how much could be built there. There could be haciendas, 5-star hotels, 4-star hotels. There's almost nothing you couldn't build there. Because Cuba will never be able to do anything else. It will never work out. They don't know how to work. They don't want to work. And so basically they languish in their poverty, stuck in their sluggish communist ideology, because it has shown that in reality they can't accomplish anything, but at the same time they don't want to give up their principles either. That's why they prefer to live in poverty and beg. Somewhere, somehow, they still have some fairly strong ones left. Sometimes it's the intelligence services, because even Maduro was guarded by Cubans and his repressive apparatus was organized by them. The Cubans. So that's the story with Latin America. And Putin lost all of that because, in fact, 2 years ago, Patrushev made a special trip around Latin America. He went to Cuba, to Nicaragua, and to Venezuela. Basically, he traveled through Cuba and then to Nicaragua. And in Nicaragua, he gathered 5 countries that wanted to immediately align themselves with Russia. So you also have to add Bolivia, Peru, and maybe Bogota to that list. And basically, they claimed that the Russian Federation should control Latin America in defiance of America, in defiance of the United States of America. Under Trump, all of that fell apart. All of those. So Patrushev's wet dreams, well, Patrushev himself hasn't really been the main ideologue for a long time now. But those who remained after him, they still have those wet dreams. Because, by the way, Solovey himself was saying that Prigozhin didn't actually die, but is in fact in Venezuela, bathing his tired feet in wonderfully warm waters and leisurely drinking all sorts of delicious cocktails, including refreshing margaritas, with many beautiful and captivating women, Latin American women. But there really were very serious connections there, military ones. The Russian Navy would regularly dock there. At that time, they were supplying and selling weapons, some kind of weapons. And there was a huge amount of drug trafficking going through Venezuela, organized, among other things, with the help of the Russian Federation, which partly transported it to Africa and from Africa onto Europe and so on. So in reality, Russia lost a very significant piece, and that left them stunned. And it happened mainly because they simply lost it without getting anything in return. Putin, in fact, even before all this happened, if you pay attention here, Trump as well, after all, this operation was planned for December 25th. But on December 25th, Putin was still somewhere out there doing something. He was, appearing on TV. But as soon as he disappeared from TV, went underground somewhere. Well, roughly speaking, they called Trump and told him, that's it. The guy is under anesthesia. And he said, well, so shall we go ahead? Then we'll move the start of this operation to January so that Putin can't do anything, because God forbid, if he could somehow, well, I don't think he would have gone out there to storm any barricades or started saying something to Trump. But you see, on the other hand, he didn't even comment on it. He hasn't even made a statement anywhere in writing yet regarding the situation with Maduro. Vasily Bensi spoke on his behalf at the Security Council. He said that all of this is a violation of international law, which indeed is a violation of international law. There's no doubt about that. But it's another matter that Vasily Benzi himself should have been asked, where were you when Putin attacked Ukraine? Because that's just as much a violation of international law. And like, if you're for international law, then get out of Ukraine, return all the occupied territories, and then maybe we can talk with you about whether we will stand in solidarity with this same Maduro.